And what we wanted to do is look at, part as I suggested with Dean Romig's comments, were these necessary to use, and were they effective? And so we were struck by if you track the history of legislation that in fact put these various tactics into place, they were almost always adopted in a superheated environment immediately following a terrorist attack. And so what you'd get is some strike, a significant number of deaths, or attacking an area that exposed a particular vulnerability, inflamed passions in the public, outcry to do something, and then an enactment of policies that would permit detention without charge and trial, and that would set up the circumstances that would permit abuse of interrogation, sometimes explicitly allowing, for instance, what they call the 5 techniques in Northern Ireland, and sometimes not explicitly, but through isolation, depriving people of counsel. The circumstances were set up where abusive interrogations would occur. We looked at these enactments. We looked at the government statistics and the analysis, but we also went further than that. We interviewed a lot of people in Northern Ireland, government officials, academics who had done studies on the use of different tactics to combat terrorism. We spoke to human rights lawyers who were representing people charged with terrorist offenses, or who were just litigating around the use of emergency powers in Northern Ireland. And we also spoke with members, people who had been convicted of terrorist offenses, some unapologetic, blatant terrorists who, in fact, the commander of the IRA in the Maze prison where the hunger strikes took place during the 1980s, we met, and the first thing he said to us was, "I'm a terrorist." But we also spoke with people who had been picked up and eventually charged and convicted of terrorist offenses, who were later exonerated. And so we had a broad spectrum of people that we conducted interviews with. And in looking at these, the use, the implementation of detention without trial and abuse of interrogation, we saw something that was very striking, and we were able to document through statistical evidence a striking pattern that, in fact, the use of these tactics not only did not suppress violence, it actually increased violence. And we had, there are a number of people who had surmised this, military officers in Northern Ireland, government officials, as well as a lot of lawyers working for NGOs. But we were really able to not only take their suppositions about what their experience was and document it with statistical evidence. And in fact, what we were able to conclude was that the use of this detention without trial or internment in Northern Ireland, where people were rounded up, largely overwhelmingly Catholic nationalists, who would be rounded up and imprisoned without charge or trial, that violence exploded after that And it exploded for a number of reasons. But in part, what we saw was a shift in the entire Catholic community of Northern Ireland away from cooperation with the government and towards the spectrum towards violence. Where, in other words, what we'd have is, in fact, this Jim McVeigh, interestingly, was the commander of the IRA in the Maze prison, who told us that he joined the IRA after his brother, who was non-political and had never been involved in any political activity, was interned and severely interrogated. That it politicized him and other members of his family who may have had some leanings towards the IRA and their positions, but were not involved. It jumped him into the camp of actual involvement. And on the other end of the spectrum, you had the largest Catholic political party in Northern Ireland, the SDLP, that was and has been during its entire existence explicitly nonviolent. However, when internment began and it was targeted at the Catholic community, they adopted an explicit policy of non-cooperation with government officials. And they did so not because they wanted to see the terrorist escape capture. It's because the law had been brought into disrepute. So many people were, in fact, they had overly encompassed the use of these tactics to a point that everyone believed that the law itself was unjust. And it echoed the language that I had heard growing up from my uncles and cousins about the unjust use of force against these communities. And so what you had was this kind of shift all along the spectrum away from cooperation with the authorities on cases of terrorism.